Welcome to Stories from the Village of Nothing Much. Like easy listening, but for fiction. I'm Kathryn Nicolai. I write and read all the stories you'll hear on the Village of Nothing Much. Audio engineering and sound design is by Bob Wittersheim. In our show notes, you'll find links to our ad-free premium version, our other shows, and our merch and partner products. We have a very special event coming up in just a few days. Come spend an evening inside the world of Nothing Much Happens. Join me for a very special live virtual event on Wednesday, November 19th at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. I'll share 3 hand-picked bedtime stories, including one never heard on the podcast, brought to life with beautiful live music from Aya Isle, and sound design and some fun extras by Bob. Together, we'll slow down with gentle journaling and creative moments to help your mind drift toward rest and dream. Tickets are available now at pave.live. That's PAVE.LIVE. Or just follow the link in our show notes. Hey, how's it going out there? Smooth as silk. Clear skies as far as the eye can see. Not so much. Yep, me too. Listen, we can't postpone our joy till life plays fair. Every day, you deserve to have some moments of peace, fun, and deep calm. And as someone who has now made 2 careers out of understanding how to build peace in the process, I can tell you that this all comes from small acts of noticing. When something is good, feels good, tastes good, when you see someone be kind or happy, take a moment to be there, feeling that residual sweetness. Our brains are built to pay more attention to what is scary than what is soft. So when we go out of our way to look for good things, we aren't putting on rose-colored glasses. We're taking off the gray ones. And that's what inspired me, by the way, to create this show. Stories that don't have to follow a traditional arc, that don't have to go anywhere, characters whose shoes you can step into, places that feel familiar and uncomplicated, all just for the joy of it. The only real goal here, the point of this, is to make you feel good for a bit. And maybe prime your pump to keep feeling good later. So let's step into the Village of Nothing Much together. I'm glad you're here. And before we go in, just because I think it'll feel good, let's take a deep breath in through the nose and sigh from your mouth. Again, breathe in and sigh it out. Good. Ducks in a row. For a while now, the days had been racing past me in a hurried blur, and I'd been reaching out trying to catch a hold of one and slow it down without much success. I had projects I wanted to finish, little pleasures to enjoy, and tasks I was ready to cross off my list. And finally, my day had come. I'd woken up and laid still in bed, listening to blustery winds moving through the trees, and a slow, relaxed smile spread over my face as I realized that I had no plans and nowhere to be, and a whole day ahead of me to set my ducks in a row. It was early still, and since the pleasures on my list were just as important to me as the items of business, I took my book and my favorite fuzzy blanket to the couch and read a few pages as I waited for the kettle to boil. When the whistle came, it sounded friendly. We were old friends, this kettle and me. I hummed to myself as I poked through the cabinet of tea options. Does everyone buy too much tea? Earlier in the week, I'd been rushing through the aisles of my local market and gotten mesmerized by the displays of tea. I was rapt. The varieties and the names and the packages and the ways I might feel and the places I might imagine when I drank them. I'd dropped 3 or 4 unfamiliar boxes into my basket and gone back to rushing. Now opening one up and breathing in the scent of tea leaves and aniseed and hazelnut. I couldn't imagine a better place to be than in my own cozy kitchen, filling my cup and watching the world wake up through the windows. I carried my cup back to the sofa, wrapped up in the blanket, and decided this first hour of the day would be given over to reading and sipping. The house was quiet, just the sound of the wind outside and the occasional turning of pages. After I'd finished my second cup and an oversized piece of toast I'd had to wrestle in and out of the toaster before covering it with jam, and reached a point of acceptable satisfaction in my book, I set it aside and thought about what should come next in my day. I had a few chores around the house that I'd been needing to tend to, some organizing and cleaning and sorting out. That would be where I would start. I changed from cozy, slept-in pajamas to cozy, fresh lounge pants and t-shirt. Put my hair up, washed my face, and brushed my teeth. "Watch out stuff that needs doing," I threatened. "I'm headed for you." I turned on my local public radio station. They were playing their Sunday music shows full of songs that felt familiar but that I actually hadn't heard before. I started in my bedroom, putting on fresh sheets, making the bed, putting away errant sweaters, and gathering a collection of empty cups and glasses. I worked from room to room, lighting candles as I went so that each space felt snug and welcoming as I finished. And within an hour or so, the house was tidy and set to rights. I moved into the kitchen next and got a large pot out and filled it with water, set it to simmer on the stove. I took an orange from the fruit basket and in one long curling strip, peeled the skin from the fruit. I dropped it into the pot with a handful of cloves, a few cinnamon sticks, and a spoonful of vanilla. I let this mix simmer away all day, filling the house with its sweet autumn flavors and softening the dry air with its steam. I cleared and cleaned my way through the fridge and pantry, setting out a bunch of browning bananas for some bread. I got out my rice steamer and filled it with the nutty brown rice I loved. I let it cook away as I mixed together the dough for the banana bread. I separated some out and stirred in a few spoonfuls of cocoa powder. When I'd filled the tins, I spooned some into each and used a butter knife to marble the mixes together. As they baked, I cooked away. A batch of hummus, a tray of granola, toasted nuts that I tucked into little glass jars to snack on through the week. My rice was done, and I spooned a cup or so of it into a bowl. I drizzled olive oil from young, spicy olives on top, added a handful of the toasted nuts and some salt and pepper, and stirred it through. I ate it slowly, gazing out the window, wondering how something so simple could taste so good and feel so nourishing. I realized that when I rushed, I felt scrappy and uncared for. Taking time made me feel much better. I watched my neighbor coming across his yard with his dog. They'd been to the park, and they looked windblown and chilled as they played tug-of-war with an old bit of rope. My neighbor, stomping his feet in the cold, finally called it off, and they headed into their house. Once the breads were out, smelling heavenly and cooling on their racks, I cleaned up the mess I'd made and wiped down the counters. I dried my pots and pans and set them back in their proper places. I wrapped a loaf of my banana bread in some parchment paper and secured it with a piece of striped string. I tromped over to my neighbor's porch and set it on his doorstep, ringing his bell and feeling the sting of the wind as I hurried back inside. I watched him open his door with a steaming mug in his hand. He picked up the still warm packet and held it to his nose. He breathed in the smell and smiled. He turned to my window and lifted his cup in thanks. I waved at him and watched him go back in. Have you ever driven down a dark road on a cold evening and looked into the windows of the houses passing by, seeing them lit up and populated, and thought to yourself, oh good, they're in there? Maybe it's a strange comfort to feel relieved that strangers have made their way home at the end of the day, but it's no less satisfying for being strange. I felt it now. My house was tidy and snug on this windy late autumn day. My neighbor was likely slicing a piece of warm bread to go with his coffee. My bed upstairs had fresh sheets on it, and I would be well fed and relaxed this week. It was a job well done. A cool walk and a hot bath. There were still a few leaves left on the trees, but not many. I looked up from my spot on the gravel path at a lingering clump of oak leaves still hanging from a branch, held high against the gray sky. They were bright orange, and I imagined them holding on and making a pact to stay a bit longer, to last a few days more. I looked around through the trunks of the trees. Frost lingered there, and the rising winds were pushing piles of dry brown pine needles and fallen leaves into clumps against roots and stumps. I drew a deep breath into my lungs and smelled less of the spicy, smoky smell of autumn and more of the cool, clean smell of the coming winter. Snow was coming, but I smiled up at the stubborn leaves. There was still a bit of time. I pulled my hat a little lower around my ears and turned my face into the wind. It was cool, but not sharp, and made me feel awake and wanting to walk again. The path turned ahead of me to move beside a creek, and I turned with it, watching water slip over mossy stones and pool in slow-turning eddies. In the spring, I'd watched frogs from this spot, as they hid in the thick grass of the banks or floated with slow, blinking eyes just above the waterline. Ahead of me, the creek picked up and spread and moved faster. It was crossed by an old bridge, and I stopped and leaned over the railing, looking down at the water rushing past beneath me. The wind was pushing me home now, and I tucked my hands into my pockets to warm them. Turning from the park, I walked past a schoolyard where a few kids were kicking a ball and calling out, shouts of excitement and jokes into the chilly air. They laughed and ran, red faces cooled in the wind, their jackets in a pile, forgotten and on their way to being lost. The wind blew harder and pushed a pile of fallen leaves up against a chain-link fence, a few stems catching and holding them there. I'm going, I told the wind. Turning onto my street, I heard the muffled, friendly bark of dogs in neighbors' houses welcoming me back. I saw one, nose steaming against the window, happily shifting weight from paw to paw, and I called out to him and waved, and he barked back. A lot of comfort comes from just saying to a friend, I see you. I turned to my own front porch and spotted a small package propped against the front door. I caught it up and smiled down at my name on the label, pushed through the door. The warmth and the smell of home wrapped around me as I hung up my coat and carried my paper-wrapped treasure to the kitchen table. Inside, I found sweet-smelling soaps and salts for the bath and a pretty bottle of bubble bath. They were tied in ribbons and wrapped in tissue, a gift. And the fact that I'd sent this particular gift to myself made it no less sweet. And my timing is perfect, I noted. A hot bath is just the thing. My tub was a big slipper tub, freestanding under a window in my bathroom. And as the water ran and began to steam, I cracked the window just a bit and let the fresh, cool air mix with the steam. I drizzled in bubbles, adjusted the water for the perfect temperature. Baths were serious business to me, and I planned accordingly. Sometimes I had a glass of wine, sometimes a bowl of apple slices to munch while I soaked. Sometimes I clipped my hair up and painted on a face mask and pretended to be one of those people who know what to do with all the products that sat under my sink. Today I wanted a tall bottle of mineral water, a glass full of ice, some music, and my book. When my bath was ready, I set out a fluffy towel on the radiator beside the tub to warm while I soaked, and slipped 1 foot at a time into the water. There's always that first rush of heat that makes me go still for a few moments. It pushes leftover thoughts out of my head and leaves me with the pure sensory delight of floating and heat. Minutes passed. I sipped my fizzy water. I propped my heels on the edge of the tub and watched steam rise from my skin. I read a few pages. I put my book aside and listened to the music. I slid deeper into the water and reminded myself of the frogs blinking in the creek. Outside my window, the wind was still blowing. Those kids from the park were probably coming through their front doors about now, smelling dinner and hungry for it. The neighbors' dogs were curled up on sofas or looking out of windows, waiting to bark hello. We were all tucked into our various nests and ready for the winter. Snow was coming. A few more weeks and we'd wake up one morning to a white, crystallized landscape. I looked forward to a winter of long, hot baths and watching the snow fall from inside my cozy nest. I leaned my head back to rest against the edge of the tub and let my eyes close. It was good to be so quiet. Winter evening yoga. Ever since the time change a few weeks back, I'd found it more challenging to get out of the house, especially once the sun had set and the darkness had sunk in. And I didn't force myself. There were plenty of evenings when I got into my pajamas as soon as I got home and into bed as soon as the dinner dishes were drying in the rack. But there were a couple of things that could get me back out into the world. And one was the restorative yoga class at the studio in downtown. Half of the lure was just knowing that the room would be warm and quiet. And as I sometimes felt like I'd heard too much for one day, seen too many headlines, talked to too many people, or just thought too many thoughts, the promise of that space where nothing was required of me, where there would be few words and a lot of comfort and relaxation, well, it sounded like exactly what I needed on every level. So tonight, I'd reminded myself how good I would feel afterwards as I got my yoga clothes on. In fact, I'd left myself a note on my bathroom mirror that I'd written after last week's class. It just said, "I'm so glad I went. Don't hesitate." These little missives sent from past me to present me helped. It was easy to lose track of how good things were when you were out of the moment, out of step with the experience. And these little handwritten reminders slipped me back into the groove. I remembered how relaxed my neck and shoulders had felt as I'd written this, how the worry lines around my brow had smoothed out, and how grateful I had been to have made class happen. I carried the sticky note with me as I gathered my keys, my mat, and water bottle, and put on my coat and boots. When I got in the car, I stuck it to the center of the steering wheel, and it cheered me on all the way into downtown. This class was still one of the village's best-kept secrets, so I easily found a parking spot right in front of the studio. I think yoga made my senses sharper, and I found that every part of entering the studio struck a chord, whether it was the faint maple scent of the old wood floors or the very quiet ambient music playing from the speakers. The air felt warm and soothing on my skin as I shed my coat and hung it up. I signed in at the desk, just exchanging a smile with the teacher, and went to set up. This class was a restorative yoga practice, and I'd been skeptical at first, thinking it wasn't really something I'd benefit from. Probably not something that I needed. But from the very first time I attended, I realized I'd been missing out. My nervous system needed the deep reset that came with such intentional rest and relaxation, and my body moved more smoothly afterwards. In my regular practice, I often used a block or two, maybe an extra cushion under my knees, but for this practice, I got all the props. I had a sturdy, cylindrical bolster, a couple of cushions, blocks, blankets, a strap, and even a couple of weighted beanbags. Once my props were lined up by the mat, I stretched out in the dim room and just listened to my own breathing. Students were setting up around me, but this studio had a strict no talking in the yoga room rule, and everyone followed it because it felt so good to have that quiet before class. Eventually, I heard my teacher moving around. She was just quietly adjusting the music and the lights, making sure everyone had all the props they needed and that the heat would stay consistent for us while we practiced. Then she tucked us into our first posture. We laid on our backs with the bolster under our knees. She suggested that if we felt a bit restless, we try holding onto those weighted beanbags, letting them pin our cupped palms to the floor. We rustled around for a few moments, everyone getting into position. And then there was a collective sigh as we began to let the shape work on us. I'd learned that using these postures, my breath, and being in the environment, was a way to speak to my own nervous system, to communicate that everything was okay. All danger had passed, and energy could be spent on restoration. Sometimes I found myself stuck in red alert after a stressful day, unable to shake a feeling of urgency that just wasn't needed or helpful. I hadn't been able to think my way out of that, but practices like this moved me out of it. In the quiet, time passed, and every few minutes we'd shift slightly. We laid with the bolsters under our spines to open our chests, then folded forward over cushions to release tight necks and shoulders. We were encouraged to make adjustments, to find comfortable expressions of each posture, so that ease was constant. After constructing a little pillow fort of blocks and cushions and propping one leg up onto it, and letting the other bend at the knee and tip to the side, I felt so comfortable. My mind was so quiet that I started to doze. My teacher often said that if we fell asleep during practice, it simply meant we needed sleep, and that we'd succeeded in making ourselves feel safe enough that it just happened. From there on out, I dipped into sleep for a few minutes at a time. And it was a different kind of sleep than I experience at home in bed. I didn't dream. I didn't notice anything. I simply had the awareness every few minutes that I had been somewhere else, but with no idea where. Finally, the teacher encouraged us to set up for Shavasana, the final posture of the hour. And even though we had been resting throughout, this deep resting shape was meant to seal in all that we had done, so that it stayed even after we ventured back out into the world. Most of us laid flat, though a few turned to the wall and swung their legs up. The lights went even dimmer. There was just a faint glow in the room and the sound of my teacher's footsteps as she went from one student to the next, covering each with a blanket. I remember the first time she had done this for me. It felt like being a child, tenderly covered as I slept on the sofa. It had brought tears to my eyes. Now, as I felt her presence beside me, the quick gust of cooler air as she tossed the blanket across me, and then the soft fabric floating down and settling onto my limbs, I let out one more sigh. I imagined the sticky note I would write for future me tonight. Dear me, we feel so much better after. Just go. After reading back through these 3 stories, I decided to call this episode The Great Indoors, because each one extols some of the joys of autumn nesting, and I think that is just as laudable as a vigorous hike or hardy bike ride. The first story, Ducks in a Row, is from way back in season 2, and it is still a fan favorite. I realized after I wrote it that lots of us actually enjoy things like cleaning house and cooking when the approach is unhurried. I am similar to the narrator of that story in that I like buying tea, looking at the boxes, smelling the ingredients. Lovely, no notes. I am different from the narrator because I do not like drinking tea. Nope. Lots of notes. I think it's one of those things where you want to be the kind of person that does that thing. It sounds serene. There's a vibe that you dig, but the actual experience clashes with your tastes. Oh well, luckily my wife drinks tea, so it doesn't go to waste. That act of lighting a candle when you finish tidying a room, I definitely do this. Or often just turn on a small lamp. When I was a kid, and my mom and I would clean my room, the last thing she would do was to turn down the bed and click on my bedside lamp. And I would stand in the doorway and just feel so good looking in at the space. See how I've been a good thing noticer since I was a kid? But it makes a space feel so welcoming. And as we move into the darker days of winter, I think it can be a small way to make yourself feel better at home. Click on a lamp, light a candle, lay a blanket over the edge of the sofa, make a simmer pot. You deserve a space that feels safe and cozy and like your own. Don't skimp on yourself, okay? The banana bread I mentioned in the story was inspired by the recipe in the book Isa Does It by the vegan cookbook goat Isa Chandra Moskowitz. Oh, the soups you will make. So many very reliable and delicious recipes. And this banana bread with the chocolate swirl, it looks very impressive. Now, the second story we heard, A Cool Walk and a Hot Bath, actually came out the very next week after Ducks in a Row. So we are just vibing with season 2 right now. And I just learned a word for when the oak leaves stay on the tree, even after they've completely dried out. It's called marcescence, meaning withering but remaining attached to the stem. You know when people in the comments of a video or post say, I feel attacked. There is something about marcescence that feels that way to me. But hey, it works for oak trees. They're doing fine. Maybe a sign from Mother Nature that things will take the time they need to break free. Reading the bit about wandering by the creek reminded me of many days I spent dressed in flannel and torn jeans and meandering along Brent Creek in my teenage years, trying very hard to look interesting and angsty and badly, like very badly, playing a guitar. It was the 90s. I am a bath fanatic. In the winter, I take one almost daily, and I am now someone who very much knows what to do with all the serums and masks under my sink. This is actually my application to become a skinfluencer. But seriously, it has become an expression of self-love and care. I talk about this a lot, online and in my shows, about learning to love myself more and the journey of that. And a lot of people ask me about, the logistics. Like, how do I actually get there? I have lots to say about that. We're actually building an app right now so we can learn this stuff together, but I digress. Doing stuff like skincare is a real, tangible way to start to shift your mindset around yourself. When you take time to care for some part of you, to slow down and show yourself gentleness, it builds these pathways in your mind that are undeniable. Gosh, I could talk for a long time about this. And skincare is just one example. It could be a million things. But I just want to encourage you to do something loving for yourself. Even if it feels a little forced or fake, eventually it won't. It will feel warranted, deserved. Our last story today was one I wrote from so much personal experience. I spent 20 years teaching yoga full-time, and I love practicing and teaching restorative yoga. I come from a lineage of teachers that lean into a very intense style of physical practice. And while I held the foundational tenets of that shared philosophy, it was always my instinct to soften the experience more than my peers. I've always been a softie. So while I loved a good hot vinyasa, I felt most satisfied with my work as a teacher when I helped people release in restorative practices. It does truly help you reset your nervous system, and the addition of props makes a huge difference. You feel literally supported because you are. Most studios that offer that style of practice will have the props you need, but I want to give a shout out to a small independent company that makes props in case you want to get your own. If I was only going to invest in one yoga prop, I would get a cylindrical bolster from Carolina Mornings. They aren't paying me to say this. I just love that their quality is wonderful. They are a small shop that gives great service. And when I owned my studio, they were who I bought all our stuff from. And sometimes I had to save up for months to order what we needed, but it was worth it every time. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to see what they have to offer. Thanks, as always, for coming along with me into my favorite neighborhood. Till next time, my dears, I wish for you a soft glow from a welcoming room, a hot bath with copious bubbles, and some time in the quiet and warmth where you can let your systems unwind and reset.